Martian Gothic Unification. What a strange name for an even stranger game. I mean, I guess this game is kind of survival horror in the vein of Resident Evil. It's like, you could say, I guess, it's Resident Evil meets Dead Space, but it really isn't survival horror. I mean, there's combat aspects in the game and survival horror aspects, but it's a lot more like a point and click adventure game, like an adventure game with puzzle elements and just exploring the environment. You spend most of your time trying to figure out where to go by finding the right key cards to open the right doors, trying to maneuver yourself through the game's many corridors, which all basically act as a maze. And again, sometimes the doors won't open because you have to pick up a very special key card that corresponds with the door's color. So it's like a maze with dead ends, and you have to go back to find special items to open up these dead ends. The game has a great feel. I mean, if you're into like suspenseful drama, horror type games, like those space movies from the 90s to early 2000s, I forget what some of them are called, like Solaris, like the horror games that take place in space, like the aforementioned Dead Space 1, 2, and however many other Dead Space games have come out already. If you're into that space horror feel when you're like alone on a futuristic space station, or at least you feel like you're alone and you don't quite know what's going on, but there's just this underlining feeling of dread constantly following you. That's the type of game this is. It's not necessarily scary. It's a lot more confusing than scary. A lot of times the game is actually lighthearted, which is really weird. It's mostly because the three characters you can control in the game, they talk either to themselves or to each other through an intercom, and they are pretty lively. I mean, they crack jokes. They're very sarcastic when they talk. Even when scary things are happening, they're sarcastic. So the game kind of keeps its mood a lot lighter than a much darker game like Dead Space, or pretty much any survival horror or space horror game of the same ilk. You can constantly switch between the three characters you control, and most of the time you actually have to, because one character has to do something for another character. Like one character is stuck somewhere, he can't open the door, and another character has to find a computer terminal to open that door. He's the only one that can do it. In a lot of ways, this game is a lot like The Lost Vikings, if you remember that side-scrolling platforming puzzle game. It's a mixture of a lot of genres, and that's, I find, endearing and refreshing. I like the fact that this game doesn't stick with the narrative of a horror, survival horror, or just a scary game. Like a scary game has to be dark and bleak. There's obviously dark and bleak aspects, but as I've said, it keeps it lively with sarcastic commentary. I think this game's best attribute is the fact that it's so versatile and it does so many things. The thing is, it's not like an amazing game by any stretch of the imagination. Just because it does a lot of things doesn't mean it does all these things really well. It does them okay to semi-good, but this game I feel like is definitely not ever going to be like my favorite PlayStation 1 game ever, or even my favorite survival horror game ever. It's not even in the running for one of my favorite point-and-click adventure games of all time. It's just a game that's kind of good, but ultimately, I don't really see myself falling in love here. I'm sorry, Martian Gothic Unification, you're not getting the rose, and you have to leave the house. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more classic game reviews. Goodbye, my friends.